In the world of Apple's hit TV show Severance, you walk into the elevator and you become someone else. Your memories gone. Your emotions edited. One version of you clocks in, another clocks out. But what if we're already doing that, just more subtly? Every day, many of us shapeshift. We become the work version of ourselves, more polished, more composed, maybe even more cautious. And then, off the clock, we exhale, morph back into someone else, a partner, a parent, a friend, a truer self. Today on The Behaviorist, we're asking, do all of us have an innie and an outie as we construct our professional selves? And what does it cost us to keep them separate? Answering this question may provide insight to what proactive and reactive measures we should keep in mind when considering long-term well-being for the sake of doing our best work in our jobs and for our own mental health. Because maybe severance isn't just fiction. Maybe it's a mirror. Welcome to The Behaviorist with Work Wisdom, where we help you adopt high-performance mindsets, behaviors, communication, and culture. I'm your host, Ryan Berardi. Our intention for the Behaviorist podcast is to share accessible, concrete practices that you can weave into your whole life to begin a shift toward joy and meaningful achievement. In this episode, we'll discuss the slow, maybe even subconscious creation of the professional version of us through a fun but relevant lens of Apple's hit series Severance. Now, to our listeners, while we won't go out of our way to give away exciting twists and turns, there will likely be some spoilers in our conversation, so you've been warned. We're grateful to have Dr. Alex Rohrer and Emily Abbruzzese joining me. Welcome, folks. Glad you're here.
Thanks for having us.
Dr. Alex Rohrer currently works as a community school director at Burroughs Elementary School within the school district of Lancaster and is an adjunct instructor of behavioral sciences at Wilmington University. Alex has his doctorate in prevention science, researching mental health promotion, violence prevention, and criminal justice system challenges. Emily Abbruzzese is the director of programs for 11th grade at Atalo Prep, where she champions a college access and leadership development program dedicated to empowering success-oriented high school students from diverse backgrounds in Lancaster County, PA. Focused on fostering radical self-inquiry, Emily leads transformative initiatives that prepare students for higher education and professional success. Hailing from northern New Jersey, Emily attended a boarding high school in New Hampshire before pursuing a degree in human development at Cornell University. Her passion for mentorship and educational access guided her move to Lancaster, where she now oversees the 6-week onboarding process for scholars and the exploratory programs that follow. Thank you again to both of you for joining this conversation. Again, on the off chance that our audience has no prior experience with Severance, let's give a quick explanation. Severance is a psychological thriller set in a company where employees undergo a procedure to separate their work and personal lives, creating two distinct identities, their innie, their work self, and their outie, their personal self. The series follows Mark, an executive at the company, as he begins to uncover unsettling truths about the program, leading him and his colleagues to question the cost of such a separation and the impact on their identities. The show explores themes of control, memory, and the boundaries between work and life. All right, let's dig in. My first question is focused on this presentation of self in everyday life. Erving Goffman talks about this idea and introduces this thought that we perform different roles depending on the context, what he calls our front stage persona. This theory highlights how much of our identity is shaped by the external expectations, particularly in social and professional settings. So in the show Severance, we see this idea played out again and again when our characters' innies are assigned a rigid role without their consent. So how does this concept of professional self come about? And really, who gets to define it? How much of our workplace identity is truly our own? And how much is shaped by societal norms or other power dynamics? Emily, let's start with you.
Wow. Yeah, I think when it comes to the professional self, that's something that is developed over time. I'm seeing that right now in the work that I do with our students, giving them tools to help identify when it's appropriate to act a certain way, when you're in an interview versus when you're in class versus when you're talking to your friends, when you're talking to your mentor, and how that looks different. Really capitalizing on how when you are acting in that quote unquote professional manner, it can help you succeed in the role that you're trying to pursue. That being said, who gets to define it? To a certain extent, you. I mean, there's no one stopping you or preventing you from acting a certain way. That being said, how you define your professional self will impact how you navigate the world. I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah, for sure. Awesome. Alex, what about your thoughts on that one?
Yeah, I just want to start off with saying that this is my innie talking. So I think this whole idea of the social stage, he talks about the expressive control piece. Mm-hmm. So how much can we show? How much emotion can we show? And I think that professional self plays into that. It's on a spectrum. So how much we can show, how much we can express in the workplace depends on, how long we've been there, maybe how long or what our relationship is like with others at the workplace. So I think that level of what you're comfortable with, what you're okay with expressing definitely plays. And I think that idea of the emotions really comes out with the professional self, because we feel like we have to leave emotions at the door when we're at the professional spot. And I think that comes out in Severance too, where their level of emotion in the workplace is much different. Mark is struggling with grief, and that's not coming out because it's severed from his innie. So that level of emotion is just much different in there. Their level of discussion with their supervisor is even very neutral. So they kind of leave that expressive control out the door and just not really bring it. And I think that defines us, because you have to decide how much of that is okay. Yeah. And I think the other person kind of gives you a little bit of feedback, and then you adjust based on that.
Something, this is off the cuff here because it's not my next question, but, so when they went down the elevator, there were some things that crossed the threshold they didn't have to relearn from the outside world. Like they didn't have to learn to walk again. Right. They didn't have to learn to talk again. Helly is able to indicate that she knows the state of Delaware, I believe, on the table initially. So even in this contrived, fun show, there were some things that bridged the threshold subconsciously, or whether authorities or self likes it or not. And so I do wonder how much of just our truest self bridges no matter what. And I guess what I'll pair this question with is, when we're young, very young, new professionals, we assume this professional self, I assumed this professional self was going to be a better version. You can't see me, listeners, but I'm making air quotes here. A better version than who I was on the outside. Right. And that seems to make sense. But then as we become more advanced and we maybe move to other companies, we're being hired and brought in because we bring something special that is different, perhaps. Maybe because it's going to help that company grow and they see it as being added value to what's already there. But maybe because we have an outside perspective. So yeah, I wonder how we make that decision as to how much to acclimate and how much to just retain our true self. I don't know, Alex, what do you think? I'm putting you on the spot here.
Yeah. No, that's a great question. And so when I was thinking about the questions for this podcast in general, I don't know if you've heard of Johari's window in terms of the true self. So it's this idea of we have these 4 different blocks. So we have what's known to others and what's known to ourselves. Yeah. And so if it's known to ourselves and known to others, this is the open area, right? This is known to everybody. But we also have this spot where it's not known to ourselves and it's not known to others. So this is the unknown, right? So that is something that throughout your life you're discovering, right? So no matter how long you're a professional, you're still unaware or that's unknown to you. But there's also this piece that you don't know it, but other people know it. That's called your blind spot.
Gotcha.
So that professional component might take a mentor, might take a professional in your workplace that's able to kind of shine the light on that blind spot. Yeah. And I feel like, finding that good mentor, and, Emily, in your workplace, that's something that you're helping these youth find, is that enlightening that blind spot and understanding, how much can we show in the workplace. Yeah. And I think it does take that guidance piece, because to us, to figure it out on our own is really difficult because we may not even know it exists.
Yeah. I mean, boy, what a great thought. So for our listeners, especially our professionals who are new to a job, maybe seeking out a close friend, maybe a mentor, maybe a coach could be really essential for that blind spot. Yeah. Emily, what are your thoughts about that? I mean, especially I think about, your younger, I was going to call them kids, but they're young adults. But as they get ready to move into the professional world, how do they decide how much to retain of themselves?
I think it's all relative to the job and the profession that you're seeking.
Yeah.
So in my current role, I would say something that allows me to really connect with my students is my near peer experience. And if I left that side of me and I guess my real world experience outside of the workplace, then I wouldn't be able to connect with my students in the way that I'm able to. So I really think it depends on the profession that you are going into. Same kind of thread. When I go to the doctors, I'm not expecting to hear my doctor's full medical history.
Sure.
So that's a perfect example of, I don't expect all of your life experiences and your personal self to come into the workplace. That's not my expectation when I'm entering. But my students do expect me to share what my college experience was like, what my application process was like, how did I navigate relationships with my family when it was living away for the first time. All of that is a big part of my job. So I think it really depends on partly the profession, and then to your point, seniority, how long you've been there. It's a give and pull, and I think it evolves over time.
Yeah, for sure. So I think if we're being real with ourselves, there is going to be a slight variation of who we are at work than who we are going out on a Friday night. Yeah. I think there's just going to be a difference, right? So Arlie Hochschild, she has this concept, she's from the University of California, Berkeley, of emotional labor, and highlights the toll of managing emotions between meeting external expectations of where we're working and then the emotion of being able to code switch when we're at home. So in Severance, Helly's innie, she's a rebel. She rebels against basically every rule, while her outie is extremely compliant, almost to the point of just desiring the approval of another character in the show. I won't give too much away here. But it illustrates the psychological cost of maintaining separate selves. Like, there is a cost to this. It may not be great, but there is one nonetheless. So I am curious, what are the emotional costs of living these split identities? And how does the risk of authenticity affect mental health and perhaps lead to cognitive overload? I don't want to lead the question here with saying it does lead to cognitive overload, but I think it's a possibility. Yeah. Alex, let me start with you this time.
Yeah, I think this whole idea, a psychological term would be dissonance. So between your, what you're thinking outside, or what's called the outie and the innie, the more dissonance or distance between those two, and you really see it with Helly. Like, she is the stark difference between her innie and the outie. I think that emotional cost is huge because she's really struggling. It's almost like an internal battle. And Hochschild, she talks about surface acting and deep acting. And so surface acting is kind of just this like masking of what's going on, right? Like, a rude customer comes up to you and you're a cashier and you just smile and nod and kind of just cover up how you're really feeling about how that person talked to you. The deep acting, I think, is where that true emotional harm comes into yourself, because then you're trying to convince yourself that you actually are happy about how that person is treating you. So you're changing the whole perception and how you're feeling about that instead of just masking it at that point. And I think that's really where the struggle comes in.
So I'm hearing you say that the safety net, perhaps, to having to do this code switching is having a good pulse on what your actual feelings are and taking time to reflect and be real with yourself. Yeah. Emily, what about you?
Yeah, I think, Alex, you bring up a good point of you're either surface acting or deep acting. This is where code switching can be a really powerful tool to prevent emotional labor in a way, because you are intentionally surface acting, knowing that when I leave the workplace, I don't have to accept this type of behavior. Or if I have a rude customer, I know that, yes, to get through the day, I have to deal with that. But in my personal life, I won't accept that. And so it's almost a sign of relief that when I leave this space, I can switch to a different person. And I do think that that's a really important tool that everyone eventually has is how to code switch. How you talk to your parents is going to be very different than how you talk to your friends. How you talk to your teacher when you're upset about a grade is going to be very different than, when you're telling your best friend about that grade. Yeah. And that's really important in order to move forward with what your goals are. And I just maintain a sense of peace, if you will.
Yeah.
I mean, Ryan and I talked about being in the education sector. You're code switching all the time.
All the time.
You're talking to students, you're talking to families, you're talking to staff, you're talking to community members, and you just constantly have to kind of switch between, how you're talking to them and how much you're showing. Because, I mean, kids are very perceptive and they'll pick up on a lot of stuff, so you have to be even extra careful. But I mean, some of that, they also can call you out when you're not being real. So that authenticity piece comes back in too.
The code switching is also interesting because you can maintain a self of, you can maintain authenticity. However, to your point, when you're talking to students, the language you use is very important. I find myself being a lot more relaxed and, maybe not using super quote unquote proper terms depending on the person I'm talking to, or even capitalizing on the fact that I have a 15-year-old brother. So I know the slang that kids use nowadays. It might sound funny coming out of my mouth, but I definitely notice the appreciation from our students when we meet them where they're at. Right. And then vice versa, when I'm talking to a principal, making sure that I'm meeting them where they're at is just as important to get my point across. Yeah. So that's where code switching can be really, really beneficial to, again, supporting what you want to accomplish.
Yeah. So, the next question, I was going to talk a little bit deeper about code switching, and I will, but I'm going to add a little bit of a piece to it. So in Severance, the characters, let's say they had a really rough day at work. And quick sidebar here. I think decades ago, I think this is being fair. The thought was, work is hard. Nobody likes work. Suck it up. Just go to work. Work is hard. That's the way work is supposed to be. Work can be hard. But I don't really buy the idea that no one is going to enjoy their time at work. I think that there are going to be some challenging workplaces. There are some toxic workplaces, and that could be a whole separate podcast about how we decide whether we can change that or we need to, for our own mental health, find another location. But work can be joyous. Oh my gosh, that's a big premise of what we want to do here at Work Wisdom, is to have people find their best version of themselves and to be fruitful and happy at work. It's not that some days aren't going to be difficult, but work doesn't have to be, hell, so to speak. In Severance, though, these characters, because they're unaware of what's happening in and out, they're not able to reflect. They're not able to take care of themselves. So this concept of code switching, either as a survival tool or just to balance situational authenticity. I guess my question, I'm going to morph here, is that I'm going to double down on, is code switching a survival tool or is it a strategy or is it both? And what can we do to protect our mental health if we've got to do this? And depending on how disparate the code switching is, how we make sure that we're good. We're good for the people in our personal lives, and we're good for the people inside of work. Emily, can you share your take on this? I know I've morphed the question a bit, so I'm putting you on the spot.
I think it's both. I think it's a survival tool, but I also think it's a strategy. I think I first recognized that I was code switching when I was going back and forth between New Hampshire and New Jersey my first year of boarding school. So I was 14 years old. I was just coming from public middle school in Teaneck, New Jersey, and popping up to Concord, New Hampshire, where my classmates were vastly different than my previous classmates. And I remember having on my notes app words that we use at St. Paul's versus words that we use in Teaneck. And part of it, again, was just to make sure that I was heard and understood. I found that if I used certain language at home, my friends genuinely didn't know what I was talking about or how to pick up on nuances in whether or not I'm being sarcastic, etc. So at that point, it was more of like a survival mechanism so that I can still be my authentic self, just in a way where I'm understood and heard in the spaces that I'm in. That being said, now looking into my professional life, it's a strategy. It is a very important strategy that I use. I think part of it also is the work that I do, and Alex, I wonder if you can relate, it's less of work looks more like integration because in a way I can never escape it.
Sure.
If I go to the sweet shop right now, I will probably run into a student.
Yeah.
Yesterday at Target at 10 p.m., I saw a student of mine that was a manager. I can, in a way, never fully escape my role because it's so ingrained into the community. So the ability to code switch in the moment to how I talk to a student versus who I was just talking to on the phone is very important.
Yeah.
But also, I think for me, in order to keep that authenticity, I almost, and maybe to a fault, over explain to the people that I'm talking to when I'm in different situations.
Sure.
I'm thinking about how I was, again, at Target on the phone with a college friend of mine, and I'll be honest, trucker's mouth. Like sometimes I look back and I'm like, I cannot believe I just said that. But when I peeked out of the corner of my eye, who I thought was a student ended up being a student of mine, I immediately on the phone was like, hold on, there's a student. I'm going to be a little quiet right now. It's your turn to talk, and I'll just affirm you, maybe not with words, but just so you know that I'm still listening. But I have to be mindful of the area that I'm in. So I think that's where code switching can be both a strategy to maintain positive relationships with the people that you have, but also a survival mechanism.
Yeah, well said. Alex, what do you think on this one?
I mean, kind of building off of what Emily said, it goes to if it's a survival strategy or survival or strategy, is this idea of proactive and intentionality.
Yeah.
So if you can be proactive and think ahead and say, okay, I may need to code switch with this student that's coming in because I know that they really respond well to that. That's a strategy, right? You're planning for this.
Absolutely.
When it's survival, you're put on the spot and all of a sudden you have to be like, oh, I got to switch real quick. And it's really, you kind of lose your footing maybe a little bit.
Yeah.
And it is a survival strategy in that moment. Or you start off with one way and halfway through you're like, oh, this is not going so well with this child or this parent, and I have to switch. So that's when it's that survival. But I think a funny point that you brought up, Emily, with this whole, and I'm using the education lens, seeing the people from, wherever you're going, Atalo, your school, outside of work. These kids see you and they almost have this severed idea of you because they've only seen you at work. And now they see you at Target and it's, whoa, who, she's allowed to go to Target and she's also like, this is the same person, but they might hear a little bit different language or the way that, just the way that you're walking around the store, even they may not recognize you. So it almost is like, we're designed to kind of see, oh, there's a work person and then there's an outside person.
Yeah, isn't this interesting? There are, there's debate, or at least conversation that's good, that's spirited, around the difference between work-life balance and work-life integration. And, I'm not sure that we're going to be able to settle this here, but here's what I'll tell you. For me, Ryan Berardi, work-life integration is what I can appreciate. But I'm also at a level in my career where I have the flexibility, so I can step away from work for a couple hours. I can maybe pick up work later in the evening. But this is sort of the equivalent of the innie being able to just kind of go up the elevator, not turn back into the alley, and say, hey, you always kind of have to be ready. The overtime contingency, again, I don't want to give too much away, but it's like, because there are some roles, we mentioned education, but I have to also say, even as you become more senior and executive in your company, your decisions, whether you are on the clock, air quote, or off the clock, have greater consequences. What
Absolutely.
you choose to do have greater consequences. And I'm not sure if that's fair, but that's the reality. And so I do think that it becomes something that we all need to be aware of as we move into formal leadership positions, that for many jobs, you are going to have to recognize that whether you like it or not, that your personal decisions may, big question mark, but they may have an impact on the company that you represent. And I think it's a question that people have to ask themselves, like, are they able to handle that as far as their own mental health? Because for some people, the answer may be no. And that is okay, by the way. They need to be true to what they think they're capable of doing, decides is the right job for me. For other folks who may say, yes, like I can handle that, it's kind of like a rubber band that's being pulled back. If you don't ever take the time to check the tension on that puppy, things going to snap back and hit you in the face harder than what you thought. I found that as a teacher, especially as a principal. Oh my goodness. But yeah, I don't know. Any thoughts on that? Random thoughts about that work-life integration versus work-life balance?
Yeah, I think there's a balance to how much you let it integrate into your life. So almost combining the two.
Yeah.
And that's something that I'm still figuring out. I heard the concept of work-life integration for the first time around this time last year, and it changed my perception on how I approached work and my personal life.
Yeah.
Because I was starting to realize that, when I'm out in town, people are going to see me. It's a personal choice, but my Instagram is public. I could make it private, but the reality is that for a lot of other reasons in my life, having it public benefits me, which means that my students can easily find my social media. So while I'm mindful about how I present myself, the reality is any individual's person's perception of you is their reality.
Yeah.
And I can't control every single person's perception of me. What I can control is my intention behind what I put out in the world. And to a certain extent, I think being authentic in areas where you can is really beneficial. So I'm thinking about how every Friday night, I'll plug it, I teach a dance class, hip hop at Mambo Jazz Studio.
Oh, very cool.
And this is a really fun and special time for me to kind of embrace a person almost like my dancer innie. When I enter the studio, I'm a different person. And that is not a side that my students get to see every day, or sometimes even my friends, my family. And I will post the videos from class online. And at first I was a little nervous, one, because, insecurity around, is this good enough, etc. It has been such a great experience, from having my advisees for the sorority that I advise slide up on my story and say, oh my gosh, Emily, you're so fun. This is amazing. I didn't know that you did this. It builds connection between people. Absolutely. And shows that I can be a powerhouse in the classroom and be very professional. And then I can also still enjoy myself. And being able to show that firsthand, I think will help our students and peers, etc., realize that there can be work-life balance through integrating it within your life.
Yeah. Alex, thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, those two terms, work-life integration and work-life balance, I've gone back and forth between the two just because I feel like there's value in both of them. I think the balance piece people kind of moved away from because they felt like it was just focused on what are you taking home from work, right? Like it was a one-sided carry, right? You're taking the bag of work stress home.
That's true.
And I think this whole idea of the integration, this came out even more with COVID because our workplaces became our home and our home became our workplaces. It was, the sever was gone, right? Like we were both all the time. And it was really hard to separate the two. So this integration of, can I work the typical 8 to 5 or 9 to 5, or can I bring a little bit of my personal life into that time frame and then also bring a little bit of my work life into other times? And it's really hard. I mean, when you're sitting there at midnight and you're not able to sleep because you're stressed out about this email that you have to send tomorrow morning, or this paper that you're writing, and you're like, oh, I'm spending all this time outside of work on work. And then the forgiveness or the integration piece is, well, can I spend some of my personal mental abilities at work? Right? Like, oh, I'm really worried about my dog. They're sick. I'm spending an hour at work thinking about that. Is that okay?
It's an interesting point. I never thought about the reciprocal of that.
So I think that, the integration, so that's probably why the balance piece even comes in there too, is, can you kind of exchange that time between the two?
For sure. Excellent. Great combo. So then my final question is really this. Is it possible or even desirable to be the same person in every part of our lives? How can we balance integration versus compartmentalization, and what practices help align our values across personal and professional spheres? Because we know in contrast, Severance shows that there's like this eerie lack of continuity that creates longing. The innie longs for something that the outie has. In some cases, the outie longed for something that the innie had when they found out in a roundabout way. You know, I love Brene Brown. Brene Brown has research on vulnerability and authenticity that emphasizes that living in alignment with our values requires intentionality, and it can be done. But again, I pose to you the question, is that like a North Star that will never actually be able to hit, to be truly ourselves in all environments? Is it even possible? And how does this frame our understanding of integration, courage, self-protection? Can we actually be our true selves in all environments? Alex, let me go with you.
Yeah, I mean, I think going back to Severance, and this, I don't think is too much of a spoiler, but I think that it's interesting when they have a stressful day or they're being rewarded even, it's with these wellness sessions that they have. And in those wellness sessions, they're telling them about their outie.
Yeah.
Like great qualities about
That's
them.
right.
And it's a reward because they don't know those things.
Yeah.
But us, as people who are not severed, we can think outside, you know, what am I like outside of work? What am I doing well outside of work? And it's interesting because in the show you have an outside person, or not an inside person, reminding you of these things. So it's really nice to hear from an outside perspective because it's not you talking to yourself.
Yeah.
And I think it's just so interesting that that's a reward for you, right? That's a wellness session because it's so powerful to know who you are outside of work while you're in work. And so I think all of us, we kind of have to remind ourselves we do have these other components to us, not just what is showing up to work every day.
Yeah.
And there's all these other factors, and it's really hard to remind ourselves of that, but having other people, you know, in the show reminding us, I think in our, we'll say outside of the Apple TV show, you know, a good mentor, a good friend at work that's reminding you of some of these things because they know you outside of work.
Yeah.
And I think those things, like Emily said earlier, like they build connections because you're all showing up to the same workplace. So you already have that in common, but it's, oh, you have a dog as well outside of work. So let's go walk our dogs together or something like that. So it's those other little pieces that we actually use to connect with each other. Is it possible or is it desirable to be our same selves all the time? I don't think so.
Yeah.
I think we have to have non-negotiables. So things that we're not willing to change across all settings, you know, the core values and the core things that you're not willing to change. You know, if I'm going to be a kind person to everybody that I talk to, that needs to stay consistent, whether I'm at work, you know, school, wherever whatever setting I'm in. But I think there are things that you kind of have to morph and adjust based on the setting and the people around you.
So principles can maybe cross the threshold, but there are things we have to be aware to adjust. Yeah, you know, I am not a gardener, but I do have grass, and so I can use grass as an example. I think of like grass in two different parts of my yard, and if I took care of grass on one side of my yard constantly versus the other one I kind of left to chance, the analogy I'm going with here is like if I'm only focusing on the work version of me all the time, and I leave the personal version of me to chance, which I think there was probably a decade of my life where I did that. Like, I wonder what happens to that. Does that personal version of you start to wither? Does it? I mean, I don't know. It's a little scary to even think about.
Yeah, I mean, that's a funny point because it's like some of the things that make us better, right? Like maybe if we take the time to do physical fitness, right?
Yeah.
They say, you know, they might say do that outside of work because we don't have that time built in the 8-hour shift. But then some workplaces are saying, no, let's give you time during work to do some of that because they realize that it makes you better. So it's almost like some places are saying, let's integrate the two. Let's have some of those things that you normally do outside of work in work because we know it will help you at work.
Yeah, for sure.
I do feel like we have to acknowledge, though, that the ability to even desire a possibility to be the same person in every aspect of our life is a privilege in and of itself. Because there are plenty of jobs in which you might not be able to match your core values to the job that you're doing, but you're doing it because it's the only job you're able to get. I mean, the job market is not great right now. I mean, I'm a recent grad. I have a lot of friends who are still seeking their first post-grad job, and it is really hard right now. And so sometimes that means taking and making a sacrifice and doing something that you might not love in the moment, but it's what's going to get you to your next steps.
Yeah.
And even that is a privilege, right? Like, what about the people who are unable to seek out education for many of different reasons, and what does that what jobs are left for them to pursue, and is that really what they want to do, or is that really the person that they want to be? I'm very grateful that in my current role, I am able to be fit, and that is something that is valued. Even over the summer, I get to teach a dance class to my students, and that is phenomenal. But that's a privilege that my workplace acknowledges that this moving your body is a great way to better yourself, both academically and personally. But that is not the case for every role.
Yeah, you make a really excellent point among many of your excellent points that both of you made today. And it's that our audience, most of our audience here will be leaders, but not all. And so I could see somebody listening to this and be like, Alex, Ryan, Emily, I'm really glad for you that you have positions that you love and or have this flexibility. But I am in this role, as you mentioned, that I don't have a lot of flexibility, and there's a lot being thrust upon me. And I could leave, but then leave to what? Where am I supposed to go? I need to pay bills. I need to get groceries. And so we have an activity that we do in Work Wisdom where you draw essentially a circle and then a smaller circle on the inside. It looks like a donut. And on the outside, you write all the things in your job that you can't control. You have to be mostly reactive to. And on the inside, you write all the things that you can control. And this sometimes takes some time. It's not usually something you're going to do in 5 minutes. But then my encouragement to the listener who's saying, there's so much about my job that is being thrust upon me that I just do not like. My encouragement would be, draw that donut. Find the things. Maybe they're just mindsets. Maybe it's smaller decisions within a larger task that you have control over. Use your cognitive energy focusing on those things on the inner side of the inner part of the donut. The stuff on the outer part of the donut, don't forget that they're there. I'm not saying ignore them, but don't waste your time and energy trying to change those if they truly are outside of your control. Use influence where you don't have control and control the controllables, because then you still have a certain level of authority over decisions and you're not wasting your time on things that are going to be out of your control. So.
I mean,
Oh, no, go.
I just was going to, I'll make a funny joke here with donuts are better in a dozen. Yeah. So I'm thinking of sharing your donut, sharing those things that you can't control with others at your workplace because they may have similarities. And there's almost like this reassurance and validation that comes from that. Yeah. So if 3 of you get together and you say, wow, we all have the same thing that we can't control at the workplace, this policy. It's really validating, even though you can't change it, that other people are acknowledging it. So I feel like that's a powerful piece there.
Well, it's that connection piece and having a shared experience that brings people together, even if it may not be the most positive experience. This just is making me think of a tool that we use to help students prioritize different parts of their life. So quick tidbit, something about Atalo that I think is hilarious is all of our students know how to solve a Rubik's Cube in under 90 seconds, including our staff. I can do it in under a minute. I think my fastest time was 37 seconds.
That's amazing.
Thank you. And people are like, why is this a part of your program? What does a Rubik's Cube have to do with college access or leadership? And the way we teach the Rubik's Cube is we break it down step by step, layer by layer. So you're learning how to look at something that seems daunting and really difficult and recognize that it's a step-by-step process. You just have to break it down. And then not only are you going to break it down and solve the cube, you're going to do it at an exceptional level, which is under 90 seconds. It's also making me think of the power of 4 and your example earlier, Alex, of having 4 different quadrants and finding where a certain concept or idea fits in that. And one that we use at Atalo is the task important or unimportant? And is it urgent or not urgent? And where does it fall? Because if it's important and urgent, then yes, you have to get that done. If it's important but not urgent, maybe that falls second to your list of things that you need to complete. I don't know where I got it, where that led me to, but it's just making me think of how while you're navigating your career, and this is something I'm still very much trying to figure out and learn, being able to decide what is super important for me right now, which values of mine do I really want to hold near and dear and will be the non-negotiable when I'm searching for a career, or when I'm just thinking about, is this the point where I leave? And to your point earlier, you might recognize that you're not in a position to be able to leave due to bills, physically moving, but still being able to acknowledge what you have control over and what you don't have control over can be a really nice way to look forward to the future when you do have the means to push through.
Absolutely. Well, Alex, Emily, I really can't thank you enough for your time. I'm so grateful to both of you for being part of this movement of helping others in the workplace to enhance their individual and collective team performance. Today we talked about professional self because I really believe the professional self, it's kind of like oxygen. It's always present and no one thinks about it until you don't have it. Then it's all you can think about. And I feel like professional self can kind of be the same. We don't think about it until we feel like there's something that's happening or we're not proud of, or we feel like it's dwindling, and then it just consumes us. Maybe the real question isn't whether we have an innie and an outie, but which one is calling the shots? Are we creating distance for safety or for survival? And what would it take to live as one whole, undivided self? Thank you, listeners, for downloading The Behaviorist, and we hope you'll subscribe. Please contact us through our website, workwisdomllc.com, where you can enjoy Work Wisdom Press and productions and ask questions and suggestions of topics you'd like us to explore in future episodes. As is our custom, we'll leave you with a quote today from author and educator Parker Palmer. We arrive in this world with birthright gifts. Then we spend the first half of our lives abandoning them or letting others disabuse us of them. And if we're awake, aware, and able to admit our loss, we spend the second half trying to recover and reclaim them. We'll see you next time.